"Don't eat that food, it's poisoned," the woman shouted, her voice hoarse but steady, making every utensil freeze mid-air at the same time. Dexter Havey froze with his fork just inches from his mouth. For a second, he didn't understand where the voice was coming from, until he saw on the other side of the glass a filthy figure, wrapped in a torn coat, her hair tied back with a worn scarf, her eyes wide with urgency. The maitre d' turned immediately, his face pale at the scandal, and 2 security guards ran toward the restaurant entrance. The guests, investors and suit-clad executives, murmured in surprise and confusion. Dexter remained motionless. The woman outside kept staring directly at him. Her eyes, sunken, held something Dexter couldn't quite place. Maybe desperation. Maybe certainty. "Mr. Havey," the head of security said, already speaking into his earpiece, "would you like us to remove this intruder?" Dexter raised his hand, still silent. He was stunned. He had never witnessed anything like this before. The woman outside might have been hallucinating, high, or just looking for attention. But something about her demeanor didn't scream desperation. There was no fear, no plea, only urgency. He placed the fork on his plate. "Have the dish tested," he said calmly, picking up a napkin and wiping his hands. Then he stood, his eyes still locked on the figure outside. The woman had already been forcibly removed. The guards were pushing her off the sidewalk while she continued to scream, "Check the sauce! The sauce! It's the tomato sauce! Don't let him eat it!" Dexter couldn't help but glance down at the plate. Truffle lasagna with a tomato and spice reduction, one of his favorites, prepared especially by the chef at Maison Have, the most refined restaurant in the network he had built himself, with an iron will and surgical precision. "I want a report on that sample by tomorrow morning," he instructed the maitre d', "and track down every ingredient used, including those delivered today." Dinner, of course, was over. None of the executives wanted to keep eating. Dexter offered formal apologies, promised answers and refunds, and left. Outwardly composed, he was inwardly rattled. It wasn't just the public disruption that unsettled him. It was the woman. That woman. 2 days later, the results came back. Traces of a toxic compound had been found in the tomato reduction. Diluted enough to go unnoticed in appearance and smell, but with the potential to cause serious harm, especially if consumed regularly. Dexter slowly closed the folder. Poisoned. He was about to eat it. He had been seconds away from ingesting something that could have killed him or caused irreversible damage. And he would have eaten it, if not for her. "I want that woman found," he told his personal assistant. "She saved my life. Find out who she is." "She disappeared as soon as security let her go, sir," the assistant replied. "No local shelter identified her, but we did get a clear image from the entrance camera. The frozen image showed the woman in the middle of the chaos, worn-out clothes, intense eyes, steady expression. She didn't look unstable. She didn't even look like someone life had broken. There was conviction in her." Dexter leaned back in his chair. Something about that face unsettled him. The following night, in his penthouse apartment atop Havey Tower, Dexter stared at the glowing New York skyline while sipping whiskey neat. He was thinking about her. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, but he couldn't stop replaying that moment, the scream slicing through the restaurant's elegant silence, his hand halting in midair, her eyes wide with warning. It felt like something invisible had passed between them. What else did she know? How did she know? It took a week for his intelligence team to find leads. One assistant dug through old academic databases and cross-referenced them with social records. "Mr. Havey," she said, entering the room with a tablet in hand, "I think we found her." Dexter put down the company report and turned to her. Sydney Morgan, 29 years old, studied biomedicine at NYU on a full scholarship, dropped out of public records 4 years ago. Before that, she reported irregularities in a pharmaceutical lab using contaminated substances in a batch of anticonvulsants. She was ignored. The company sued her for defamation, and she left school, never finished her degree. Dexter took the tablet from her hands. It showed a photo of Sydney smiling on a university campus, wearing a white lab coat, the same eyes, not yet hardened, but full of hope. "And after that?" he asked. "No formal records," No address. She vanished from the system. Dexter was silent. A brilliant former student, ruined for trying to do the right thing. And now homeless, saving the life of a man who embodied everything that had destroyed her. "Find her," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Wherever she is." Sydney Morgan walked along 34th and 9th, wrapped in her old coat, her fingers cold as she held the paper cup where she sketched small illustrations to sell. Some kids loved her caricatures. She had learned to survive this way, never begging, never stealing, just offering a piece of herself. She paused near the subway entrance, hoping a generous soul might buy her a coffee. That's when she saw two men in suits staring straight at her. Her stomach turned. They approached. "Miss Morgan?" She took a step back. "Who's asking?" "We were sent by Mr. Dexter Havey. He'd like to thank you in person. He says you saved his life." "I didn't do it for him," Sydney replied coldly. "I did it because it was right. Now leave me alone." She turned to go, but one of them spoke quickly. "He asked us to tell you he believes you, and that he wants to hear you out." Sydney froze. That wasn't what she expected. No one had ever wanted to hear her. Not when she tried to stop hundreds of contaminated pills from being distributed. Not when she was sued, humiliated, forgotten. Now someone said they wanted to listen. "Where is he?" In Dexter's private office on the 70th floor of the tower that bore his name, Sydney sat across from his spotless desk. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, her posture still wary. Dexter studied her closely. She was thin but not fragile. Her clothes were dirty but her eyes were clear, the kind of clarity that comes from seeing danger no one else could. "I should be dead, shouldn't I?" he said at last. "You should," Sydney replied bluntly. "How did you know?" She exhaled slowly. "I recognized the alteration in the source. I reported a similar formula years ago. I knew the smell, that faint metallic sheen. I saw the waiter switch the plate and I didn't think. I just shouted, 'You saved my life!' And ruined a fancy dinner," she shot back dryly. Dexter smiled, for the first time in weeks. "I want you to work with me," he said straightforward. "Not as just any employee, as a consultant for my food safety team. I want you to find everything that's wrong in my kitchens." Sydney blinked. "You want to put a homeless woman in charge of overseeing food safety for your billion-dollar restaurant empire? I want to put someone in charge who saved me from dying because I trusted the wrong people." She remained silent. She had never expected this kind of offer, but here it was. Real. "If I say yes, I do it my way," she said at last. "No filters, no flattery. Just the truth. The truth is exactly what I need." Sydney stood up, looked him in the eye, and extended her hand. "Then we have a deal. But I'm warning you, the truth isn't an easy dish to swallow." Dexter shook her hand firmly, feeling something shift deep inside him, and knowing that maybe, just maybe, his life would never be the same. The security guard shoved the double doors open, clearing the way for Dexter Havey to enter the chemical division's testing room at Havey Foods, Inc. The sterile smell of alcohol and freshly opened plastic filled his nose, while the muffled hum of ventilation fans circulated the cold, controlled air. 3 analysts in lab coats and gloves stood by with tense expressions. "So?" Dexter asked without wasting time, his eyes fixed on the metal container on the center table. One of the scientists, a thin man with a shaved head and bloodshot eyes from lack of sleep, cleared his throat. "It's confirmed. The source sample contained traces of a compound derived from phenylhydrazine. It's toxic, especially if it accumulates over time. Repeated doses could damage the liver, the kidneys, maybe worse." Dexter clenched his jaw and swallowed hard. "And the restaurant?" "The supply team is tracking the source of the tomatoes and seasonings used that night, but..." The scientist hesitated. "All signs point to intentional tampering." Silence. Dexter stepped back, breathing deeply. He remembered the suspended fork, the voice cutting through the dining room, the woman's eyes from outside the window. She knew. She saw it before anyone else. "Sydney Morgan," he murmured, almost to himself. That same morning, his team had delivered the full dossier. She was real, not a hallucination, Not just a voice from the street. Sydney, 29 years old, former biomedical student. She was supposed to be a researcher, a real fighter, according to one professor who agreed to speak anonymously. Dexter stroked his chin. He had met all kinds of people in the corporate world, men who'd kill for a bonus, women who'd sell their soul for a title, but no one like her. 3 days later, Dexter was crossing the company's main lobby when he caught a glimpse of a figure leaning discreetly beside the loading dock gate. Sydney Morgan, wrapped in a worn-out overcoat with an old backpack slung over her shoulders, was watching the building like someone sizing up enemy territory. He didn't hesitate. He opened the side security door with his badge and stepped onto the sidewalk. "Sydney," he called. She turned slowly without surprise, as if she had been expecting him. Her hair, tied in a makeshift knot, fell in loose strands around her face. But her eyes were just as clear and steady as the day she shouted the warning. "You tracked me down again?" "No, you came on your own." She lifted her chin. "You said you wanted the truth." "I came to see if that was true too." Dexter crossed his arms, the spring wind cutting between the buildings. The analysis confirmed it. The dish was contaminated, and forensics believe it was sabotage. "Someone inside your own restaurant? Someone with access to the kitchen? We're still investigating." "But you saved my life, that's a fact." She nodded, didn't smile, but didn't look away either. "And what do you want now?" "For you to work with me. I want you on my team." "I've said it before," she replied. "If I do this, it'll be my way." "And what's your way?" She tugged on her backpack straps. "See everything, say everything, please no one." Dexter smiled for the first time that morning. "Then you're hired." That same day, Sydney was taken to the administrative headquarters, where a temporary badge reading S. Morgan Consultant was handed to her in an envelope. A new uniform was offered, but she declined. She preferred to work in the clothes she wore. The first looks she got in the hallways ranged from suspicion to outright disdain. Some executives didn't even try to whisper. "She's the woman from the restaurant, isn't she?" He's lost it. A homeless woman in food safety? What's she going to inspect? Trash? Sydney listened to it all in silence. Inside the company's lab, she began reviewing recipes, technical sheets, and logistics processes with the precision of someone who had done it before, but without the need to please anyone above her. On her second day, she uncovered 5 inconsistencies in ingredients used by third-party suppliers, one of which involved a preservative banned by the FDA 2 years earlier. On her third day, she presented a report to the department head titled "Ignorance or Complicity: The Two Faces of Corporate Negligence." The document hit like a bomb. The department director turned red. He tossed the report onto Dexter's desk. "This is an insult." Dexter read the title, then the contents, page by page. "Is it all accurate?" "Technically, yes, but the tone. The tone is exactly what we need." In the following days, Sydney dove into spreadsheets, lab reports, and site visits to Havey Foods branches in Brooklyn, Queens, and Jersey. She discovered that one subcontracted cold storage facility was keeping food at temperatures below the required threshold. She took pictures, documented everything, filed reports. Reactions were mixed. Some supervisors felt threatened, others impressed. On one of those visits, Dexter accompanied her personally. He watched as Sydney entered a storage area without hesitation, opened a freezer door and pointed to the thermometer. "This should be at -17. It's at -11. You know what that means?" The manager stammered. The sensors. Maybe there's a delay. It means the bacteria you swear are dead might still be alive, and in kids' hands 2 days from now." Dexter said nothing, just watched. She spoke with a force that didn't come from authority. It came from pain. From someone who had seen what happens when people turn a blind eye. At headquarters, the executives began to split into 2 camps, those who feared Sydney and those who wanted to stay on Dexter's good side. The atmosphere grew tenser, but also cleaner. In a board meeting, one of the vice presidents remarked sarcastically, "Mr. Havey, with all due respect, Our new consultant seems more like a government inspector than part of the team. Dexter responded without breaking eye contact. Maybe that's exactly what we've needed all along. That night, Dexter climbed to the rooftop terrace of the company with 2 cups of coffee. He found Sydney sitting on a ledge, looking out at the Manhattan lights. "Up here the world feels quieter," she said without turning. "You changed the mood of my empire in less than a week," he replied, handing her a cup. "You deserve a little peace." She took the coffee, eyes still on the city. "Silence is good, but only after you've screamed everything that needed to be said." Dexter sat beside her. "You know, the night at the restaurant, when you screamed, for a second I thought it was just madness, some random intruder looking for attention. And now? Now I know you were the only person in that room who knew exactly what they were doing." Sydney gave a half smile, not from pride, but something closer to relief. "I didn't save you out of kindness or gratitude. I saved you because I couldn't stand to see another injustice go ignored." Dexter nodded. "I understand, and that's why you're here." She looked him in the eye, steady. "Then brace yourself, because I'm not done screaming, and some of your dishes are still rotting on the inside." Dexter smiled. "I'm glad you're here, Sydney." She didn't reply, but that night, for the first time in years, she slept in a room with a bed, a lock, and hope. The pen hit the floor with a sharp snap. Sydney Morgan quickly bent down to pick it up, ignoring the sideways glances around the conference table. The weekly meeting of Havy Foods' food safety team was in full swing, and though she was still officially just an emergency hired consultant, as one manager liked to remind everyone, she had earned her place, one analysis at a time. "The Newark distribution sector is still showing temperature variations in refrigerated transport," she said, settling back into her chair. "We checked 5 trucks over the last 72 hours. 3 were above the permitted range." "Could be a sensor issue," countered the logistics director, adjusting his tie. "Could be," Sydney replied curtly, "but spoiled food in storage isn't a sensor issue. It's a fact. Sour meat, moldy cheese, fermented fruit. A sensor doesn't cover up the smell." Dexter Havy, seated at the head of the table, didn't smile, but he didn't interrupt her firm tone either. In fact, there was a quiet gleam of approval in his eyes. "Sydney," he said, "go ahead with your proposed protocol adjustments." She pulled another sheet from the brown envelope in front of her. "We recommend a complete restructuring of contracts with regional suppliers. Those with the highest failure rates should be terminated immediately, and new ones must sign a liability agreement with an immediate termination clause in case of sanitary violations." Silence. The kind of silence Sydney knew all too well. The one where no one dares challenge you, but everyone's just waiting for you to slip. "You're suggesting we toss out million-dollar contracts based on 3 days of reports?" one vice president jabbed, flipping through the papers in front of him with undisguised disdain. "I'm suggesting we stop pretending contaminated food is just a technical issue and start treating it as a direct threat to consumer lives," she replied, without raising her voice. Dexter closed the folder in front of him. "The recommendation will be taken into account. Sydney, prepare the final report with those suggestions and email it to me by tomorrow morning." The meeting was adjourned, but the heavy stares followed Sydney all the way to the door. She was getting used to that feeling, being the topic of conversation even after leaving the room. Hours later, in her makeshift office next to the chemical lab, Sydney was typing up the report on a loaned computer. The old wooden desk had worn edges and a drawer that jammed, but the space was quiet and breezy. She could think there. A knock at the door interrupted her flow. She turned, fingers still resting on the keyboard. "Come in." It was Dexter. No suit, just a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked less like the CEO of a billion-dollar empire and more real. "Just checking on the report." He stood in front of the desk, not sitting. Rough as it should be. Truth doesn't come polished. "That's what I expected." Sydney sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Are you ready to see how exposed your company really is?" "I am," he answered without hesitation. "But that's not exactly why I came." She raised an eyebrow. "No? I want to make you a formal offer." Sydney said nothing. He continued. "You've exposed failures my team ignored for years, found gaps in contracts, flagged real risks, and you're still operating as a temporary consultant. No team, no resources. That bothers you more than it does me. It bothers me a lot, he said firmly. That's why I want you to take over as director of the new independent audit division. You'll have the authority to review any document, visit any branch, and report directly to me. Sydney frowned. Sounds like a trap in a gift box. There's no trap, Dexter assured her. Just fair recognition. She stood and walked across the room, stopping at the window. She looked down at the cars below, the city's glow trying to outshine the alleyways she knew all too well. You know what happens when someone like me climbs too high, she said, still facing the glass. The ones at the top try to push you off. The ones at the bottom call you a traitor, and in the end, everyone waits for you to fall. You won't fall, Sydney. And what if I don't want to climb? She asked, turning to face him. What if I just want to keep telling the truth without worrying about titles, badges, or carpets that don't smell like mold? Dexter smiled slightly. Then keep doing it, but from the inside, with tools, with protection. I don't want to silence you. I want to amplify you. She crossed her arms. And why do you want that, really? Out of conscience? Guilt? PR? He hesitated for a second, then replied, because your presence forces me to be a better man, and my company a fairer one. Silence. Sydney returned to the desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. I want full freedom to build my team. Hire whoever I want. Choose what to prioritize. And if I uncover something that involves top-level people, I want full authority. You'll have it, he replied without pause. Even if it's you. Dexter looked her in the eyes. Even if it's me. The next day, the internal announcement of the new division was published. Sydney's name sparked confusion, chatter, and emails full of question marks. Most executives didn't believe it would last, but Sydney didn't waste time. She called her first meeting with a team of 5 analysts, 3 of them recent graduates she personally selected after reading reports ignored by former managers. On the whiteboard in the small new division office, she wrote in bold letters, "Every clause that protects someone must be understood by those who have no one." One of the analysts asked, "Is that a motto?" "It's a truth," Sydney replied, "and it's going to be our filter from now on." Meanwhile, on another floor, Dexter reviewed the first reports from the new division. Within weeks, they had already uncovered minor fraud in contracts, improper payments to suppliers, and vague clauses that benefited the company at the consumer's expense. He knew this would happen. What he hadn't expected was how deeply it would affect him, not as a CEO, as a man. As someone raised to believe success justified everything, that profit equaled merit, and that not knowing was enough not to be complicit. That night, late, he went down to the audit division's new office. He found Sydney standing by a digital map, crossing supplier lines marked with red alerts. It's past midnight. Bacteria don't sleep. And you? Neither do I. Dexter stepped closer. Do you really believe truth can change an empire? Sydney looked at him for a moment, then back at the map. No, but I believe it can save lives, and to me that's worth the entire empire. He nodded, speechless. Then, in a measured tone, he asked, Can I ask you something? You already are. Why do you still trust me? She took her time answering. I don't, but I'm betting on you. And you know what happens with bad bets, don't you? Dexter swallowed hard but smiled. I do. Sydney turned back to the reports. Then don't disappoint me. There's still a lot of rotten food in this system, and I'm not done exposing it. I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Morgan. And he left, knowing that with her inside, the game had changed for good. I need to see the CEO, now. The voice sliced through the hallway with the cold precision of a freshly sharpened blade. The receptionist looked up, surprised by the command from someone who clearly wasn't part of the usual 70th floor routine. But the woman in front of her didn't seem like someone who accepted obstacles. Dressed in a tight red dress, stiletto heels, and an Italian designer blazer, Isabel Hawthorne Langley radiated equal parts confidence and poison. Do you have an appointment? The receptionist asked, already uneasy. No, but tell him the lawyer who saved the 2019 merger is here, and she doesn't like to wait. The assistant hesitated, but had no choice. Isabel Langley was no ordinary guest. Former legal advisor for Havey Foods, strategist behind complex contracts, and, well known to most on that floor, Dexter Havey's ex-girlfriend. A woman used to sitting beside power or above it. Dexter was standing by the glass wall of his office when the door opened without a knock. "So it's true you let a homeless woman become head of audit." Her voice arrived before her perfume. Dexter turned, already prepared for the clash. "Isabel, I thought you'd lost your mind, but seeing it up close, I think you've just lost your sense of risk. A woman with no verified past, no degree, no allies on the board, and you put her in charge of auditing the company's contracts? That's an invitation to collapse. Sydney Morgan is the most honest person to ever walk these halls, and as far as I know, honesty has never caused a collapse, at least not outside of Wall Street." Isabel laughed, stepping closer. "You forget, Dex. The corporate world doesn't run on integrity. It feeds on insulation, on deals, on silence. Maybe that world should die then." She stopped in front of his desk, planting her hands firmly. "I'm here as an external legal advisor. The board brought me back because Sydney's investigations are impacting stock prices. If you keep giving her carte blanche, you'll start a civil war inside your own company." Dexter stared at Isabel without backing down. "I'd rather a war than a rotten empire." Isabel narrowed her eyes. "And you prefer her. That's it, isn't it?" Silence. That afternoon, Isabel was officially reinstated as strategic legal advisor by direct appointment of the board. Within hours, her influence began to ripple through the corridors. In the audit division, Sydney received a memo signed by Isabel, requesting full access to all ongoing investigations. "Invasive, fast, and unnecessarily arrogant," Sydney said, tossing the paper onto the table. One of the younger analysts, Noah, scratched the back of his neck. "Want us to deny the request?" "No, I want controlled copies of the files prepared. I want to track everything she touches." "You think she's going to interfere?" "I think she started sabotaging before she even walked in." The next morning, Sydney arrived at her office and found 3 boxes stacked on her desk, papers inside, disorganized and shuffled. On top, a handwritten note. "Let's see if your new title means more than just noise. Reanalyze everything." She looked at the boxes, then up at the security camera in the corner. Watched, monitored, provoked. Perfect. She got to work without pause, rechecking contracts, reviewing signatures, flagging inconsistent dates. She slept only 4 hours a night for 5 straight days. And even then, when she submitted the reorganized report, she found out it had been misplaced. She searched the files, the backups. Nothing. No trace. That afternoon in a meeting, Isabel publicly called her out. "Ms. Morgan failed to deliver the requested report on time. Perhaps she's overwhelmed or unqualified." Sydney didn't respond, but her eyes burned. The following week, the bomb dropped. A confidential document related to a potential merger with an international organic food chain was leaked to the press. The leak caused panic among investors and led to an 8% drop in the company's stock value. At an emergency board meeting, Isabel walked in carrying a folder. "The source of the leak has been identified." She opened the file. The document was sent from the terminal of one employee, Sydney Morgan. "Here's the email sent to an external address. We printed the IP. Everything matches." Sydney, seated at the table, remained silent. Dexter looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't send anything," she said firmly. "I don't even have clearance to access that folder." "The IP confirms it," Isabel said, "and the internal logs show the document was printed using your password." She handed the evidence to the board. Dexter slowly turned to Sydney. "Do you have anything to say?" She swallowed hard. "This was planted. It's a setup. Isabel's doing what she's always done, manipulating facts, controlling the narrative, eliminating anyone who threatens her grip on power." Isabel smiled. "What an imagination, Sydney. Is that your legal defense?" Dexter said nothing. For too long. "Mr. Havey," one of the board members said, "we need an immediate decision. The press is waiting. Shareholders are pressuring. We need to set an example." All eyes turned to him again. Dexter took a deep breath. "Sydney Morgan is suspended until further notice. HR will begin the termination process." She looked at Dexter for a long second. There was no theatrical hurt, no surprise, just something quietly breaking inside. "I warned you," she said, rising with her head held high. Truth doesn't belong in polished hallways, and she left escorted by 2 security staff. Hours later, her office was empty. Her belongings gone, as if she'd never been there. Her name had already been removed from the digital directory. It was as if Sydney Morgan had been nothing but a shadow, one that disturbed too much. Greg, the HR manager, passed through the hall and muttered with a smirk, "By Monday, the company can breathe again. That woman was a walking threat." In Isabel's office, a silent toast with champagne, and at the top of the tower, Dexter Havey stared out at the city as if hoping to find among the cold lights of the night some explanation for what he had just done. But all he found was a bitter taste in his mouth, and far too much silence. The desk phone vibrated just once. Dexter Havey, eyes fixed on his monitor, didn't even glance away. It had been 3 weeks since the name Sydney Morgan was spoken on that floor, at least not in front of him. Since her departure, the company's rhythm had returned to normal. Polished meetings, predictable reports, hollow corporate smiles. And yet, everything felt grayer. The screen in front of him displayed Havey Foods Inc.'s stock graph. The red number blinked slowly, down 4%. Shareholders weren't happy. The international merger, the one tied to the leaked documents, had been suspended. The media questioned the company's credibility, and more quietly than any headline, a discomfort was spreading like mold across departments. No one trusted anyone anymore. Dexter closed the chart and stood. He hadn't slept well in days. Not because of the falling stock or the boardroom meetings, because of her. The silence that had settled after Sydney left was a new kind of noise, more unsettling than any scream. "Mr. Havey," James, his assistant, peeked through the door cautiously. "Do you have a minute?" Dexter nodded, still distracted. James stepped in with a blue folder in hand. His expression was more serious than usual. "The IT team finished the second audit of our internal systems. They went deep, really deep. And the leak didn't come from Sydney's computer." Dexter slowly turned his gaze to him. "What do you mean?" "Apparently the IP was faked. Her password was used by someone with admin-level access, someone who could manipulate credentials and simulate print jobs. The actual transmission came from the private network inside Isabel Langley's office." For a moment, the silence seemed to devour everything. Dexter grabbed the folder, scanning the data, the digital trails, the timestamps. A sequence of entries hidden to the average eye that told a clear story. Isabel had sabotaged Sydney, and he had believed her. He had chosen the wrong side. Isabel walked into his office 30 minutes later, as confident as ever, tablet in hand, already speaking. "Dexter, we need to revisit the terms with the Canadians. The adjustment projection..." "Sit." His voice cracked like a gunshot. "Now." She stopped, surprised but obeyed. "Is there a problem?" Dexter tossed the folder onto the desk. "Explain this." She read the top of the document and her expression changed immediately. She tried to compose herself. "This doesn't prove anything. Anyone could have... You forged an email to destroy an innocent woman. You planted evidence, sabotaged reports, fed the press. And you know what's worse, Isabel? I believed you." She opened her mouth to respond, but Dexter was already standing. "You're not just fired. You're being formally reported to the board and the authorities. And if any more confidential documents show up in the wild, it won't just be your reputation that gets buried." For the first time in years, Isabel appeared shaken. Her voice faltered. "You're throwing away everything we built." "I'm trying to rescue everything we destroyed," he replied, eyes burning with anger. "Especially her." Security was called. Isabel left without protest. But before walking through the door, she looked back with a bitter gleam in her eyes. You'll regret this. The truth doesn't feed empires, Dexter. No, but lies poison them. That afternoon, a press conference was held at Havey Foods Inc.'s headquarters. Cameras were already in place, expecting a statement about the stalled merger and the company's growing credibility crisis. No one expected what Dexter had to say. Wearing a dark grey suit without notes or a teleprompter, he faced the reporters directly. 3 weeks ago, an employee named Sydney Morgan was terminated under the belief that she was responsible for leaking confidential documents. Today, I am stating publicly that she was innocent. The room froze. The real culprit was a former employee who manipulated evidence and forged credentials. Ms. Morgan, from day one, warned this company about risks we chose to ignore. Instead of listening, we chose silence and convenience. More flashes. As of this moment, Havey Foods Inc. is withdrawing from merger negotiations with Global Green as a matter of honoring the integrity we were supposed to represent. We are also launching a full external audit and a contract review process led by an independent committee. "And what about Ms. Morgan?" one reporter shouted. Dexter took a deep breath. "I'm trying to find her, and if she allows it, I intend to apologize in person and return everything I took from her." In his penthouse office, Dexter stared at his laptop, scanning the last information James had pulled together. Sydney had left the small apartment where she'd been staying with her mother 2 weeks earlier. No bank record, no card usage, no active account. Neighbors said she left without saying where she was going. Vanished. "Where are you, Morgan?" he whispered, voice tight. 3 days later, James walked in with an envelope. "Mr. Havey, we found a lead." Dexter looked up, heart racing. "An old interview from Sydney during her time at NYU. She mentioned a place, a community center where she used to teach science to underprivileged kids in the Bronx. She said if everything went wrong, she'd go back there." Dexter stood immediately. "Start the car." The neighborhood was humble but full of life. Children ran between cars. Street vendors shouted their prices. The smell of fried food filled the air. The community center had peeling paint and a yard with a rusted soccer goal. Dexter stepped out of the car and walked, ignoring the curious stares. A woman at the front desk recognized him. "Aren't you the guy from TV?" "I'm looking for a woman named Sydney Morgan. She used to teach here. Do you know her?" The woman smiled. "Of course. She's in room 2, helping a group with homework." Dexter followed the hallway, his heart pounding like a teenager's. When he opened the door, he saw her, Sydney, sitting on the floor, surrounded by kids with open notebooks. She wore jeans and a white t-shirt, her hair in a high bun. She spoke with passion, drawing chemical formulas on an old chalkboard, the same clarity, the same fire. She saw him, paused. The room fell silent. "Kids, work on page 6, she said calmly. She stood. The two of them faced each other in the hallway. "What are you doing here?" "Trying to fix what I broke." "Took you long enough." "I know." She crossed her arms. "Isabel?" "Gone. Reported. Exposed. Fired." "And the rest?" "I pulled the merger, opened an investigation, held the press conference, but none of it matters if you won't come back." Sydney looked away. "I don't want a title or a rehearsed apology. I just wanted, once, for someone to listen to me." Dexter stepped closer, his voice honest. "I'm listening now. But if that's not enough, I'll wait, as long as it takes." She stayed silent for a long moment. Then, not smiling but with steady resolve, she said, "Then wait and prove it," and walked back into the classroom. Dexter stood in the hallway, heart aching and something harder to name. Hope. She was alive. She was strong. And she was still the woman he couldn't afford to lose. The reception clock at the community center read 7:48 a.m. when Sydney Morgan pushed open the side door, balancing a bag of apples, a stack of papers, and a clipboard. She wore the same old jeans, now freshly washed, and a button-up shirt borrowed from one of the volunteers. Her hair was pulled back quickly, a pencil tucked behind one ear. She took a deep breath as she walked in. The place smelled of chalk and weak coffee. But here, She felt some peace. In the reading room, 4 kids were fighting for space around a single book, and Sydney knelt beside them with a genuine smile. Whoever can tell me what a eukaryotic cell is, in your own words, gets an apple. The kids lit up, their eyes sparkling at the challenge. Far from the glass tower of Havy Foods, far from reports, boardrooms, and expensive carpets, Sydney had reconnected with a part of herself she'd almost lost, the educator, the woman who wanted to turn knowledge into foundation. And in that space, where nothing was luxurious but everything was real, she finally breathed again. Still, when she laid her head on the pillow, a real pillow, on a borrowed mattress in the shelter next door, Dexter Havy's face would resurface. His voice, his tired, sincere gaze, his words, "I'm trying to fix what I broke," and, more than anything, the choice he made, to admit publicly that he had been wrong. No one did that, not in his world, and certainly not for someone like her. But trust was something else. She'd been burned too many times, by systems, by men, by contracts, and by promises. Across town, in the penthouse of Havy Tower, Dexter stared silently at his computer screen. "She hasn't responded?" he asked James, who stood nearby holding an envelope. "No formal reply, sir, but—" He handed over the envelope. "Here's what you requested, the contract draft. I reviewed it personally. No hidden clauses, not even a comma." Dexter opened it and read the title, Reintegration Proposal, Sydney Morgan position, Director of Independent Audit salary, 10 times her former emergency contract, benefits, full healthcare plan coverage for Sydney's mother, highlight, right to defense clause for any employee under investigation. At the bottom, a handwritten line by Dexter himself, "No contract is worth more than the truth. If you find a single lie in here, tear it up." 2 mornings later, the black Bentley parked discreetly in front of the community center. Children swarmed around the car, clapping and shouting, "It's the suit guy, Miss Sydney's boyfriend." Dexter stepped out with a contained smile, carrying a white envelope. He wore dark jeans and a light blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, a sincere, if slightly uncomfortable, attempt to look less like a billionaire and more like a human being. Sydney appeared in the doorway of the science room, arms crossed. "What do you want now?" "To give you this." He held up the envelope. "And to hear your no, if that's still your answer." She stepped forward, took the envelope, and opened it. She read it slowly, every clause, every line. The children around them fell silent. "You added a fair defense clause for all employees. That was my idea. You listened." "I heard everything, Sydney. I just didn't know how to act on it at the time. But I want to make it right." She kept reading. At the end, she saw the handwritten line. Her eyes lingered on it. "Why'd you do this?" "Because I don't believe in contracts with traps anymore, or in companies that silence people like you, and—" He hesitated. "Because I miss you, as a woman, as a mind, as a conscience." Sydney sighed, folded the paper, and slipped it back into the envelope. "I'll review it. And if I find a single whiff of corporate cynicism, you're going to eat this entire thing." Dexter laughed, relieved. "With coffee or without?" "Without, it'll hurt more." She turned to go back inside. Before closing the door, she added, "Oh, and you're giving a talk here next week. Topic: how the most stubborn CEO in the country almost lost everything to arrogance. That's punishment? It's a second chance, and a lesson for kids who need to know that even powerful people can mess up and change." He nodded, more moved than he let show. "I'll be there." 5 days later, the main lobby of Havy Foods was packed. Journalists, employees, and shareholders crowded around a hastily assembled podium. Dexter walked in under a flurry of camera flashes. Behind him, Sydney, wearing a black blazer and grey slacks, simple but flawless. At the microphone, Dexter took a deep breath. "Today we launch the new division of Independent Audit, a department led by someone who dared to speak the truth when everyone else chose silence. A woman who was humiliated, discredited, and yet saved us from a moral collapse." He turned to Sydney. "Welcome back, Director Sydney Morgan." Applause filled the lobby. Sydney kept her expression composed. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the mic and said, I'm not a symbol of overcoming. I'm not an example. I'm a reminder that anyone can fall, but they can also rise if truth matters more than power. More applause, some heartfelt, others tense, but no one dared look away. At the end of the day, back in her glass-walled office, Sydney stood looking out at the city. Dexter appeared with 2 coffees. Without a word, he handed her one. Figured you'd prefer it black. You're a slow learner, but you do learn. Was that a compliment? No, a legal observation. She took a sip, then, without looking at him, said, "I'm still hurt. I know. And I still don't fully trust you. I know that too. But if you keep listening, even when it's hard, maybe we can build something that's worth it." Dexter looked at her, a quiet tenderness in his eyes. "I'm listening now, and I'm not planning to stop." She smiled for the first time in weeks. "Good, because you're still on probation." And the two toasted with coffee. Not to a deal, but to a new beginning. No poison, no hidden clauses. The silence of the early morning was broken only by the sound of keys, quick, precise, relentless. Sydney Morgan typed like she was at war. The new audit report sliced through the structure of Havy Foods Inc. like scalpels through corporate flesh. Contracts with murky clauses, backroom deals, deadlines changed without explanation, and most of all, a culture that had, for years, protected the powerful while quietly discarding the vulnerable. She wasn't there to make friends, and certainly not to please. She was there to reform, expose, protect. With her new team composed of young analysts, 2 women previously fired unjustly, and a former call center employee promoted after blowing the whistle on irregularities, Sydney had built a quiet revolution inside the company. They called themselves the Antibodies, and they lived up to the name, identifying what was toxic and eliminating it. Across the building on the 70th floor, Dexter Havy couldn't sleep. The light in his office stayed on every night, long after the halls emptied. Standing before a scale model of the company's new headquarters, he held a folded piece of paper. The contract with Sydney, the one she had read, top to bottom, the one she had accepted. With each clause, he recalled the limits she had set. Nothing above the truth, not even you. It was the first time in his entire career that someone had set boundaries for him, without fear. And surprisingly, he was grateful for it. 2 months had passed since Sydney's reinstatement. Corporate routine had changed. Now everyone knew that no report would go unanswered, no camouflaged supplier would slip by unnoticed, and no executive was untouchable. But with the changes came the whispers. The CEO's different. Word is he runs everything by her now. Did you see the way he looks at her? Greg, the former HR manager, who once mocked Sydney regularly, now muttered during meetings. "The girl in the torn coat runs the place now. I bet the CEO's on his knees." The comment didn't go unnoticed. That afternoon, as Dexter passed Greg in the elevator, he said only one sentence. "Be honest, Greg, are you afraid of losing your job or of losing the lie that protected it?" Greg swallowed hard and said nothing. That Friday, Sydney was called into a conference room to review a new ad campaign. The agency had proposed using the redemption of the wrongfully terminated employee as the emotional centerpiece. She listened, took notes, closed her notebook and said, "I'm not a product, but your story is inspiring," one executive argued. "It shows resilience." "It shows that you almost destroyed someone by mistake," Sydney replied, looking around the table, "and then tried to profit from it. I'm not an inspiration, I'm a reminder." The proposal was shelved. The following week, Dexter showed up on the 12th floor, something he rarely did. Grey suit, slightly tousled hair, and 2 coffees in hand. Sydney saw him coming and raised an eyebrow. "Do you usually invade other floors, or did you forget where your ivory tower is?" "There's a fine line between invading and visiting. I brought coffee, black, strong." She took the cup, smelled it, approved. "Trying to make up for something." "Always, but this time, I wanted to show you something." "Another dark room full of dirty contracts?" "No," he smiled. "Something a little less legal, and a little more personal." That afternoon, Dexter brought her to a small hall he'd rented in Harlem. Inside, a group of 20 young people waited with folders, notebooks, and eager eyes. It was a pilot program for community legal education aimed at teens from vulnerable neighborhoods who wanted to learn their rights. "This was your idea," Dexter said, opening the door. "You mentioned it months ago, remember?" "I was joking," she murmured, taken aback. "I wasn't." Sydney looked around. On the whiteboard, in big block letters, it read, "Every clause is a promise. Read before signing." She turned to him, visibly moved. "You actually did this." "I did this with you, and I want you to be part of it, as a mentor, a director, or whatever you want." She exhaled, her voice shaky. "You really don't know how to stop surprising me, do you? I just learned to listen to the right person. That a compliment? A legal observation?" She laughed, for the first time, really. During the first class, Sydney explained what a contract was. She gave simple examples, apps, job agreements, bank services, then asked, "Have any of you ever signed something without understanding it?" Every hand went up. "Then this class is for you, so no one can ever fool you again with pretty words." At the back of the room, Dexter watched, not as CEO, not as a powerful man, but as someone transformed, a man who recognized his fall and the gift of having been challenged by someone who refused to be dismissed. On the way out, under the reddish sunset over New York, the two walked side by side, a comfortable silence, until Dexter stopped. "You're right not to fully trust me yet, but I wanted to try something." "Try?" He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I made a contract." She sighed. "Oh no, more paperwork." "This one's not corporate." She took it, read, "Lifetime contract of mutual trust, active listening, and black coffee clause 1. Truth comes before pride. Clause 2. Disagreement is not a reason to give up. Clause 3. If I ever forget who you are, remind me and pull me back." At the bottom, a blank line marked "Signature of Sydney Morgan" and a yellow post-it. "You can review and suggest edits, of course." She stayed quiet, then laughed. "This is, without a doubt, the most honest proposal you've ever made. And the riskiest. You're brutal with clause reviews." "Still am." She looked at him, soft eyes but steady. "Maybe I'll sign it. One day. For now, I'll take the coffee." Even without a signature. Even. Because sometimes trust is built in conversation, not on paper. And they kept walking through the city's vibrant streets, with a pen in their pocket and an unspoken promise. What they were building didn't need to be rushed. It only needed to be real. Laughter echoed through the main room of the Harlem Community Education Center. Tables arranged in a circle, teens debating simulated contracts with intensity, while Sydney Morgan walked among them, clipboard in hand, correcting details, provoking thought, planting seeds of critical doubt. "If the clause says they can change the price without notice, what do you do?" she asked a girl with braided hair. "I don't sign it," the girl answered, excited. "Exactly. Not every pretty offer is a safe one. Read, ask, and if you're unsure, say no before you regret it." The class ended with applause. Sydney thanked them, gathered the materials, and stepped out with a light heart. Teaching there was more than a social project. It was healing. For herself, for the others, for a system she had always tried to challenge, and that had almost broken her. Outside, sitting on the front steps, was her mother, Donna Celia, wrapped in a grey shawl, sipping tea from a foam cup. "They adore you," the woman said, beaming with pride. "They need someone who speaks their language, and sometimes that person has to have scars too." "Have you forgiven Dexter?" her mother asked, direct as ever. Sydney sighed, sitting beside her. "I'm considering it. He's trying. He's made real changes. But trusting again after a fall like that, it's not a straight road. Sometimes, sweetheart, it's just a curve worth taking." Across the city, on the 70th floor of Havey Tower, Dexter Havey reviewed the schedule with his faithful assistant, James. "Everything ready for the press event?" he asked. "Press confirmed, investors too, but, sir," James hesitated, "are you sure about this?" "I am. Havey Foods can't just be a profitable corporation. It has to be a just one. And that only starts if we look back, admit our failures, and acknowledge who truly saved us. Does she know? Not yet. But she will today. The main lobby of headquarters had been transformed into an impromptu stage. Lights, cameras, reporters gathering in front of a banner that read, "Transparency is the new contract." Dexter stepped up to the mic, holding a written speech, one he never glanced at. "A few months ago, I made the biggest mistake of my career. I trusted a broken system. I ignored a legitimate warning, and I fired the one person who tried to save this company from itself." Cameras clicked, murmurs, eyes fixed on him. "That person is Sydney Morgan. Today, she is not just our director of audit. She is the reason this company is still standing. And more than that, she's the model we will follow from now on." He motioned to the side of the stage. Sydney appeared, hesitant. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pinned up neatly. The crowd broke into applause. She stepped onto the stage with firm posture and a cautious but calm gaze. Dexter faced her and, in front of everyone, pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the one she knew well. "This is the contract you still haven't signed, but today I want to offer something different." He unrolled a new sheet, now with large, clear letters. "Lifetime Love Contract, Clause 1. I promise to listen before I react. Clause 2. I promise to walk beside you, even when we disagree. Clause 3. I promise never to put power above truth again. Clause 4. There are no fine print lines between us." "Sydney Morgan," he said, voice steady but clearly emotional, "will you sign this contract with me? Not as a director, not as an auditor, but as the woman who reminded me of everything I'd forgotten. As a partner, as the person I can't afford to lose." The room went silent. Sydney looked at him, took a breath, then laughed. "You actually did this? In public?" "With witnesses, and no hidden clauses." She took the paper, read every line. The crowd held its breath. "You're officially the worst emotional lawyer I've ever met," she said. "But will you represent me?" She smiled now, openly. "I will. But we're revising Clause 3. You still relapse into bossy CEO mode." He laughed. She signed the paper with a black pen. And there, in the middle of camera flashes and applause, he pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than any negotiation. No doubt, no posturing. It was love, simple, real. 3 months later, a new wing opened at the community center. A glass-walled room with computers, a legal library, and volunteer instructors. On the door, a plaque read, "Morgan Havey Office. Legal rights for all, free legal assistance for low-income youth and families." There, Sydney spent 3 nights a week handling real cases, unlawful evictions, abusive terminations, predatory contracts. Dexter showed up from time to time, often just to observe, serve coffee, or help a student understand a rental clause. "You think this really changes anything?" she asked one evening as they closed up the office. "I think it changes everything, for those who never had a chance," he replied. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I still doubt you sometimes." "You can doubt me, just don't doubt us." She smiled, eyes already heavy with exhaustion. "Then hold on tight, because love without clauses is the hardest to keep, and the only one worth it." And there, among folders, lukewarm coffee and honest promises, the two sealed the only contract that ever truly mattered: to live for one another, with truth, with stumbles, with hope. No fine print, no poison, no masks. Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.